I know how much this would have. Simon Cowell's name has been trending again, but not for a talent show, a record deal, or a viral audition. This time, it is something far more personal, something that has left even those closest to him shaken. Reports suggest the television icon, once known for his sharp critiques and unwavering confidence, has been quietly battling the darkest chapter of his life. "I can't stay silent any longer," he allegedly said. His words sending a ripple through an industry built on performance and perfection. Behind the cameras, behind the success, something tragic has been unfolding. Something that has turned the world of entertainment's most powerful figures upside down. Fans who once saw him as invincible are now left asking, what could break a man who seemed untouchable? What happened to Simon Cowell is both heartbreaking and unexpected. And as more details come to light, the truth is far more devastating than anyone could have imagined, the fall that no one saw coming. Simon Cowell's downward spiral into heartbreak began quietly. There were no big headlines just yet. A few missed appearances, a delayed interview, and a sudden absence from the show that defined him. At first, people thought Simon Cowell was taking a well-earned break. Even the toughest judge in television deserved time off, but as days turned into weeks, whispers began to spread. Something was not right. His team remained silent and his social media accounts stayed unusually still. Then came the reports, unconfirmed and fragmented, but deeply worrying. Those close to Cowell described a man no longer driven by the energy that once fueled him. A friend allegedly confided that Simon had stopped laughing and that even his son's voice, once his daily joy, could not always lift the cloud that had settled over him. The change was stark. What had once been ambition now looked like exhaustion. What had once been confidence now looked like collapse. When the truth began to surface, it was not a scandal or a career crisis. It was grief, deep and relentless. The world had only seen the aftermath. Cowell later admitted that it was during this time he began to understand the meaning of burnout. He reportedly said, "You wake up one day and realize you can't feel joy." He was not losing interest in music or television. He was losing interest in life. The laughter on set felt forced. The excitement of discovering new talent no longer carried the same spark. Viewers saw the same man, the decisive judge, but those close to him saw someone fading behind the performance. The weight of loss and the spiral that followed. Simon Cowell's public life has always been defined by precision. Every move, every word, every judgment carefully measured. Yet behind that image of control lay a man quietly unraveling. The deaths of both his parents had not only left him heartbroken, but had also opened a wound that success could not heal. When his father, Eric Cowell, passed away in 1999, Simon was already making waves in the entertainment world. On the surface, he handled it with the same professionalism that characterized his career. But those who knew him privately remember a man who struggled to process the loss. His father had been the steady voice in a chaotic industry, a mentor who encouraged him to follow his instincts. Eric's approval meant more to Simon than any rating or contract ever could. Losing that presence left him adrift, unsure of how to navigate a life without that grounding support. He buried himself in work, convincing himself that productivity could drown out pain. The television projects multiplied. The business meetings never stopped. The silence of grief was replaced with constant noise. But grief does not vanish simply because one is busy. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the long car rides home, in the spaces between applause. Years later, in 2015, when his mother, Julie, died, the fragile balance Simon had managed to create collapsed completely. The heartbreak took over. Julie had been his biggest supporter and closest confidant. She was the first person he called when something went wrong and the first person to tell him when he was wrong. Her voice had been the comforting reminder that behind the powerful persona, he was still someone's son. When she was gone, Simon felt the world lose its color. Friends said he was never quite the same afterward. He became quieter, more introspective, yet outwardly he seemed busier than ever. He expanded his shows internationally, appeared on multiple panels, and maintained the image of the unshakable judge. But behind the scenes, the exhaustion was becoming unbearable. He was suffering from what he would later describe as an emotional fog, a state where life moved forward, but nothing felt real. One close associate recalled that Simon began staying late at the studio, even after everyone had gone home. He would sit in silence, scrolling through old photos of his parents, sometimes smiling faintly, other times staring blankly at the screen. The man who could spot the next global superstar in seconds could no longer recognize himself. His grief soon turned into something heavier. Depression crept in quietly, disguised at first as fatigue, then as indifference. The man who once thrived on high-pressure decisions found it increasingly difficult to focus. Simple tasks felt monumental. He became withdrawn, avoiding conversations about anything beyond work. Even laughter on set, once natural and effortless, now sounded hollow. Simon was never one to show weakness, and admitting that he was struggling went against everything he believed about himself. In the entertainment world, vulnerability was often mistaken for failure. So he put on the same sharp suits, gave the same confident interviews, and played the part everyone expected him to play. But inside he was falling apart. During this time, several people in his circle noticed small changes that signaled something deeper. He began to lose interest in food, skipped social gatherings, and stopped answering calls from friends who tried to reach out. Work became his only refuge, the one place where he still felt a sense of control. But even that control was slipping. Privately, he admitted that he had never learned how to deal with loss. His parents had been the foundation of his world, and without them, he no longer knew what stability meant. He once reportedly told a friend, "When you lose the people who made you who you are, it feels like the rest of the world is just pretending." The irony was painful. Simon had spent years helping others chase their dreams, encouraging them to believe in themselves. Yet, he could no longer believe in his own strength. His grief had consumed the very passion that defined him. The joy of discovering new talent, the thrill of live television, the satisfaction of success. All of it began to feel meaningless. As months turned into years, his once bright energy dimmed. The smile that charmed millions became less frequent, and the sparkle in his eyes, often visible during auditions, began to fade. He was fighting a tragic battle no one could see. In interviews that followed, Simon later acknowledged that he reached a point where he simply stopped feeling. "You wake up and everything looks the same. It is like being trapped inside your own mind," he allegedly said. That confession revealed what many had suspected, but few dared to ask about. The man who once seemed invincible was silently breaking. The loss of his parents had left Simon Cowell hollowed out. And his unrelenting work ethic, which once fueled his success, became the very thing that deepened his despair. He thought that if he kept moving, the sadness would fade. The smallest progress, a few steps, a stretch, or a full night's sleep without pain felt monumental. For someone who had built his identity around control and perfection, the process of learning to depend on others was humbling. He was used to being the one giving orders, not the one being told what to do. But now his body dictated the terms. Every movement reminded him of fragility, of how quickly everything he had built could be taken away. "It was a wake-up call," he reportedly said later. "I realized how close I came to losing everything." The fear went beyond physical pain. Simon began to worry about irrelevance. Would the world move on without him? Would his shows continue to thrive in his absence? Would people forget the man behind the empire? Those questions haunted him during the long sleepless nights when even turning in bed was agony. Yet, in that same darkness, something began to shift. He started to think differently. For the first time in decades, he was forced to reflect instead of react. He began therapy, not only for his body, but for his mind. Conversations with therapists helped him understand that his constant drive for success had masked a deeper pain. Unhealed wounds of loss and loneliness that he had carried for years. Recovery became not just about regaining strength, but about rediscovering balance. He started reading again, spending quiet mornings with his family and noticing details he once overlooked: the sunlight through the window, the sound of laughter, the stillness that no longer felt suffocating but necessary. He slowly accepted that slowing down did not mean failure. It meant survival. Each day of progress, no matter how small, became a testament to resilience. The crash had stripped him of his armor and forced him to see the world with new ease. Months later, when he finally stood dead, he was no longer the same man. The spinal injury had left a permanent mark, but it had also given him something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Perspective. He realized he could rebuild his back, but could he rebuild himself? That question lingered, unspoken yet unavoidable, as he took his first steps toward a quieter, more intentional life. The light returns. Fatherhood and redemption. After years of chaos, pain, and recovery, the light in Simon Cowell's life returned in the form of a small boy with wide eyes and an unshakable smile. Eric Cowell was born in 2014, long before Simon's accident. But it was in the years after the crash that Simon truly understood how much his son had saved him. During interviews, he often said, "Eric saved my life." Few people knew how literal that statement really was. Before Eric, Simon had lived for applause. After Eric, he lived for laughter. The difference was profound. The boy brought color back into a world that had gone gray. Those who visited Simon's home after his recovery described scenes that were almost unrecognizable from the man they had known. The harsh music mogul, who had built a career on brutal honesty, now spent his mornings helping his son build Lego towers, reading bedtime stories, orchestring him through the garden. For the first time, Simon was learning the beauty of stillness. The same man who once feared slowing down now found peace in quiet evenings, sitting beside Eric as they watched cartoons together. It was the kind of simplicity that success could never buy. Simon often spoke about how fatherhood had changed him. He admitted that before Eric, he had been selfish, consumed by his own goals and obsessions, thought happiness came from work, he had said. But then Eric came along and he realized happiness is this. He gestured to his son who was laughing nearby, completely unaware of how deeply his existence had healed his father. Those close to Simon noticed the transformation immediately. He began cutting back on his work schedule, choosing to spend more time at home. The man who had once thrived on sleepless nights in studios was now content to wake up early to make breakfast for his family. He no longer needed the rush of the television lights. He had found a different kind of joy in the warmth of his own home. His relationship with Lauren Silverman also deepened. She had stood by him through the worst moments, through his recovery, and through the emotional storms that followed. Now they shared something that anchored them both. A sense of purpose that extended beyond their careers or reputations. Simon learned to listen more, to let go of control, and to trust the quiet rhythm of family life. Friends said he held it more easily, smiled more genuinely, and seemed less burdened by the weight of expectations. There were small moments that revealed how much he had changed. Once he had been known for his perfectionism, unable to tolerate flaws in music or people. Now, he was the father who proudly filmed Eric's slightly off-key singing, clapping as if it were the greatest performance he had ever seen. Another time, while speaking to a friend, he reportedly said, "You spend your life trying to be the best at everything, and then this little person comes along and suddenly you just want to be the best dad." Fatherhood softened him. It gave him patience where there had once been only pressure. It taught him compassion not just for others but for himself. He began to accept that failure and imperfection were part of being human. The sharp edges that had once defined his personality began to round off. And with that change came healing. The grief of losing his parents never vanished, but it no longer consumed him. Through Eric, Simon rediscovered a connection to love he had once felt from his own mother and father. He saw in his son the continuation of everything he had lost. He often said that becoming a father made him think about his parents differently, understanding for the first time what they must have felt for him. The empire he had built no longer seemed as important. Awards, ratings, and headlines began to fade into the background. What mattered now was something much simpler. Being there for bedtime stories, helping with homework, being the person his son could always count on. For the first time in years, Simon Cowell was not chasing success. He was holding it in his arms. The same man who had once measured his worth by numbers and recognition had finally found something that no amount of fame could equal. Love, in its purest form, had brought him redemption. It seemed for a while that the storms had passed. Simon had found balance, peace, and area sun to wake up each day. The laughter of his son filled the spaces that grief had hollowed out. Life had given him a second chance, and he was determined not to waste it. But life has a way of testing those who believe they have finally found calm. Just as Simon began to breathe again, another shadow crept quietly into his world. One that would challenge every ounce of strength he had left, the weight of a father's silence. When news first surfaced